So over on Pinterest, I found this World War II carrot cake recipe. It appears to be British, and so I decided I would try it. And going off of Pinterest, it's hard to find a source sometimes, so I searched, reversed image searched for this picture, and I could mostly just find where it has been repinned on Pinterest, and there were about 3 sources that weren't directly back to Pinterest. One of them was a food and rationing slideshow about World War II celebrating V-Day. So I believe that kind of helps support that this is British. Also that the measurements were given in ounces, which is a weight-based measurement instead of the volume-based measurement of cups. So that kind of played into it. As you can see, it's alongside a lot of propaganda, well, not necessarily propaganda, but World War II pamphlets for the home front. You can see it's alongside like cookie recipes, what you can do with your rations. And then it was over on this website that is, and then this one as well, both about rationing and cooking in hard times. So first off, I started off with my flour. It says in the recipe self-rising flour, which if you don't know is all-purpose flour with baking powder. So there is an equivalent of about a cup, which is 8 ounces roughly, with about a teaspoon and a half of baking powder. I would double check Google before you take that as fact though. But that, I believe, is the measurement I used. So you can see I'm measuring it out by weight. I got my iPad in the background that you can see with the recipe pulled up. And overall, it was a super easy recipe. I highly recommend it. I think that it wouldn't be considered carrot cake today. Like when you think carrot cake, you think spiced, you think carrot being prominent, you think cream cheese, you think sort of a darker cake, you think, brown sugar. But in this, it's very plain. It's sort of more of a white cake. The carrot kind of just disappears into sweetness. And it's good. It's just not what we would think of as carrot today. So as you can see, I'm putting in the baking powder. Not much to say about actually mixing it up. I followed the order that the recipe instructions give, and it was kind of interesting because it's not how I normally incorporate ingredients. Normally I beat the butter and the sugar together to cream it, but in this it is you work the butter into the flour first. So I thought that was kind of interesting. The recipe also was vague on the amount of milk or water to add, and the bake time as well as the pan size. So things to keep in mind that I took liberties with. But overall, I'd say super easy. I rated it over on my blog on 3 different qualities. First is texture. It was an 8 out of 10. It isn't overly dry or dense, but it's substantial enough that you don't really need a napkin when you're holding it. But, it holds up. It's not going to just crumble into nothing. Taste, it was about a 7 out of 10. Like I said, it's not really what you think when you think carrot cake, but it was sweet. It's kind of plain, so it had, when you have a scone with your tea, a scone can be kind of plain, but it just kind of goes with tea, the additional flavor. So in that sense, it was really good, and I quite enjoyed it with a cup of tea. Baking, 10 out of 10. Super easy. As you can see, it only really uses 1 bowl, and it doesn't require any fancy utensils. It doesn't require a mixer. It's mostly just by hand with a spatula. So you might have seen it there, but I had forgotten to preheat the oven before I got my hands all buttery, so you might want to keep that in mind. But even with that, it didn't take very long to mix up the batter, so I had to wait on the oven anyway. It took 15 minutes from gathering ingredients to putting it in the oven. And so you can just kind of get an idea of how easy it actually is. See, I'm just working the butter in. It didn't say for it to be cold, it just said to work it in. So I made sure that it was in pea-size pieces, but thoroughly incorporated before I worried about anything else. So as I go to wash my hands, you can check out flockandsquawk.com, which is my blog that accompanies all of my YouTube videos. It goes along with my Instagram over at flock_squawk if you want to check that out also. You would have seen this specific cake last week or so. So, you can get the lowdown on the recipes, some more pictures. There's my Instagram. I just sort of post once a day, give a little preview, give some other things that aren't in the YouTuber on the blog. So you can see I'm taking the flour and butter back onto the scale because now it's time to weigh out the other ingredients. There's the sugar, and all of this was super easy. I just took a scoop, added it to the bowl until I got the correct weight, and nothing really to it. And this recipe calls for 1 egg or 1 reconstituted dried egg, and that was because in the war, eggs were rationed along with sugar. I believe butter was also rationed, and this is a UK recipe, and in Britain specifically I know for sure they had a lot harsher rationing than what the US had, especially where I believe most of Europe had a harsher rationing because they were direct bombings and difficulty getting supplies, whereas the US, it's a larger country, it wasn't in the direct line of fire necessarily, so it was easier to get goods. So as you can see, I'm adding the raisins in, also weighing them out. I haven't mixed since adding the sugar and everything, and you don't really need to in this recipe. It's just simple as adding it to the bowl. So I'm taking and moving stuff out of the way because I decided to grate the carrot, and this is not sped up, I don't believe, but I honestly just took a white carrot and grated it. 4 times, 15 minutes includes the grating of the carrot. Now I just chose white carrot because that's what we had in the fridge, but I think that adds to the white cake look that I ended up with. So if you used an orange carrot or a purple carrot, it would definitely stand out more that this has carrot in it. And I even think that you could adapt this recipe for zucchini. Grate up some zucchini and strain it, or really get some of the excess liquid out. You might not need to, you could just adjust your milk for that, but I think it would actually turn out really good. And I feel like this is a good overall base recipe if you want to add in other flavors. Because when you think carrot cake, you think cinnamon and nutmeg, some of those flavors, and you can add those in because this doesn't even have vanilla extract. It just is, the basic ingredients, and I feel like you could easily adapt it to your taste, which makes sense for a recipe that was made using rations. You don't always have things, or you don't always have the ability to get things, so it makes sense to be able to have such a basic recipe to rely on and know it'll turn out good even if you don't have something that we might consider as a necessity or something basic in the pantry. So as you can see, it didn't take that long to grate up carrot, and I actually had to grate up a little extra after I weighed this, and I ended up getting exactly 4 ounces that the recipe calls for from that one large carrot. So I felt pretty tickled. So yeah, you can just sort of see me there adjusting to get the scale back in. It's kind of interesting trying to film a recipe because I bake so often off camera that I'm just sort of in the habit of not stopping. There's little pauses. I basically just can whip out a cake recipe or something like this in no time without really thinking. So filming really adds a level of trying to think and trying to make sure everything is in view. So I apologize if anything's kind of awkward. I do kind of just stick with a static shot with my tripod, so maybe in the future I'll try and work on getting better. I feel like it might be easier for people who have a kitchen island because we don't have that, so I'm just sort of stuck trying to jockey between seeing things when I do try and switch up angles. So let me know what you think. Let me know in the comments below, over on Instagram, on the blog, wherever you'd like, wherever you'd feel safest. And this definitely could be done a lot faster with a food processor, but in World War II, you might not have access to just a quick grating food processor. It probably wasn't common, if it was even available. Might not be able to get pre-grated carrots, so I just did it by hand. And as you can see, it wasn't an issue. Carrots grating aren't that difficult, it's just a little bit of manpower. So there you can see I'm just scooping up all I can, and I got exactly the 4 ounces I needed. And it's kind of hard to tell in the video because it is the white carrot. It kind of looks like cheese. Which this might not be bad with cheese. Make it more of like a savory thing. So I started out with the whisk, which was kind of a bad idea. It's too thick of a batter if you want like a normal cake batter consistency to really use the whisk, so I wouldn't recommend it. I just go straight with the spatula. Maybe beat up the egg in a bowl beforehand so that way it goes in smoothly. But I just cracked the egg straight into the bowl, and that's why I wanted the whisk initially. So, to each their own. It just kind of is maybe something to consider. And also, if you have issues cracking eggs, it's always smart to crack into a bowl or cup before dumping it into your batter. That way you can ensure that you don't get any eggshells in there, or if you need to separate out the whites and the yolk, it's a little easier because you aren't trying to jockey the yolk between the shell pieces or use an additional thing. So I'm starting to add milk, as you can see. I added just a little bit at a time until it reached a thick cake batter consistency. Not overly thin, not too thick. As you can see, it was too thick for the whisk to start with. So I just brought out the trusty spatula. And one thing that I love about old recipes like this, you don't really need much. Like, people were doing it more by hand. There weren't as many modern conveniences like a mixer. And also, they weren't trying to feed an insane amount of people. Like this, if you wanted to, in the pan I did, it would make an easy 6 servings, no problem. You know, they would be reasonable sized pieces. And, you know, if you're the atomic nuclear family of 4, that might be all you need. Or you could easily add more or cut the cake smaller, and you could have the extra pieces for your larger family or your extended family. So I'm just mixing it up by feel. You can see it's a little thick there. And this recipe did not tell me how long or what size pan to use, so I used an 8x8 glass Pyrex dish that I have, and I tend to use that quite a bit for like a smaller cake recipe like this, and it worked out great. It filled it about half full before cooking, and it sort of stayed that height after baking. So I'd recommend no bigger than an 8x8, maybe a 9x9. It's really up to preference. And so now I'm starting to clean up things a little bit, put things away, wash the grater, you know, whatever's in the sink. I'll be working on that. So yeah, it's cleanup time. It didn't take very long. I had to wait for the oven to heat up anyway. So I recommend always clean up as you go, or at least take the time to clean up while things are baking in the oven. So I just took the leftover butter that we had, greased the pan. It doesn't say that necessarily in the recipe, I don't believe, but it's always a good idea to either line your pan, butter your pan, oil it, you know, butter, flour. There's a multitude of ways to make sure that it doesn't stick in your pan. So just try out what works for you, what you know works. So yeah, there you can see I'm just greasing the pan and then putting the butter away. So as you can see, the batter is pretty thick. It's similar to a cake one, but a little more dense, I think I made it, now that I'm looking back on it. You can definitely see that the raisins are pretty evenly distributed. So I think each slice definitely has a good distribution of raisins. So I think raisins you can definitely change to your preference, but they do add an extra layer of sweetness. So there you can see I'm just spreading it out to sort of get more of an even layer on my cake. I definitely recommend adding more milk if you want a looser batter. Mine was definitely thick. But yeah, nothing really left to say. My hands were definitely clean because I had just washed not too long ago. I think I rinsed off my hands also after having greased the pan. And yeah, I'm washing my hands again in this. And then I turned on the oven light you saw me hit there because with the oven light on, I can see the temperature gauge that we have hanging on one of the racks in the oven to have a second confirmation of what the temperature is. This is pretty recommended for if your oven is noticeably off. Ours, it beeps well before it actually hits the temperature that we've set it to, but if we give it enough time, then it does eventually heat up. So this was 425 for 35 to 40 minutes for me. I just checked with a toothpick near the center a couple times. If it came out with batter or anything, then it was not ready. And here you have it, the final product. It got good color along the sides and bottom, a little color on top, but because I used a white carrot, I think it's not too obvious that it is carrot cake or has carrot in it. So, yeah, it's pretty pale in color. You can definitely see there that it is light, but here I am just slicing into it. Like I said, it tastes good. It was just sort of plain, but with a cup of tea, it's great. And if you don't like raisins, I think I would substitute it with some other dried fruit, or just omit it completely and maybe add just a touch more sweetener with sugar or something. But yeah, you can definitely get an idea of the texture I ended up with. I show more of an up-close shot. Yeah, I'm just taking a bite and then we'll show you the up close. At this point I kind of realized maybe I wasn't close enough, so I had brought it in. But yeah, good texture. Not too much crumbs, as you can see when I'm holding it. And yeah, thank you so much for watching.